Today, I'm joined by Dave Kellogg. I'm so excited to talk to him. I've been following his work and his content for a long time. And on December last year, he was kind enough to give me a lot of feedback, a lot of advice on the concept of paid and on the concept of agents and how agents are replacing the nature of work in software and how agents will get paid on outcomes, not on seats or consumption. And it was an incredible conversation that I had with him, and I have continued his conversation with Dave. And we're finally got on the podcast. Now, Dave has been a CEO, has been a founder. He is a CFO Whisperer. He has been the CEO of Host Analytics, and then he ran Salesforce Service Cloud business for a while, and he was the CEO of MarkLogic, and he led marketing for 9 years at Business Objects. He has an incredible career. He is one of the brightest minds when it comes to software, and I'm so excited to have him here. Dave, let's get paid. Dave, so good to see you again.
Good to see you.
What have you been up to? You've been talking about all sorts of things. You were talking about FDs and the death of SaaS, the death of seat. Something else died. Was it the SDR that died? Like, what did you kill lately?
I haven't killed much, really. It's just observing what's happening in the market. But yeah, I mean, certainly inbound SDRs are challenged by AI SDRs. Seat-based pricing is certainly challenged. What else? FDEs are on the rise, right? And I actually think that's linked to selling outcomes, which we can come back to. What else did you ask about? SaaS, SaaS is transforming, I'd say. I don't think it's dying. I think dying is a little dramatic. I'm a big believer in the need for apps, but they need to have a strong AI component. Let's say that. If you're just a pure traditional SaaS solution, yeah, it's a problem.
Got it. All right. So let's take it from the top on the outcome-based selling, because your piece was brilliant. It made its rounds. And as you remember, you were one of my first calls when I started Pay to talk about outcome-based pricing. And you said, go, 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 when everybody was telling me that was full of shit. So why don't you run it from the top? What is the argument of the deck that you sent out on LinkedIn?
Sure. So I think there's demand for outcome-based pricing, number one. Number two, outcomes are not binary. Like, what exactly is an outcome? And I use the example of a dating site, which is an outcome, a date, a second date, a relationship, an engagement. Like, what's the outcome, right? So I think that was the second big thing from the deck. The third was, if we're going to price for these things, we better deliver them, right? And then the last was just, some people are using forward deployed engineers to help ensure they do that, given the need to sell outcomes and given the need to deliver them, and given the fact it's early in the cycle, so these products are not fully baked, right? I think those three things come together there.
But how do you measure an outcome? This is where everybody like hits me on the knees on this. Like, oh, you can't measure an outcome. It's really hard to sell an outcome. What do you say to that?
Yeah. So look, an outcome could be anything, right? It could be a resolved support inquiry. That's one of the easiest ones to talk about. It could be a sales meeting booked, right? That's what SDRs do for a living. It could be a line of data transformation code generated, right? It could be a task that got automated, a processed invoice, right? Just say you get an invoice, you're trying to match it, put it in the general ledger system, match it against a purchase order, right? That processing one of those is an outcome. So sometimes outcomes are bigger. One of my favorite examples is from EvenUp, a legal software company, where the outcome is generating a demands package, where it's something you send an insurance company and say, we want $1 million on this claim, and it's a whole package that proves that argument. So it's back to the dating analogy. What's the outcome you're looking for? Because dates are an outcome. You could charge by the date. You could charge SaaS by the month, right? You could charge by the date, or you could charge by the relationship. Now, bear in mind, there's a cash flow issue, because it's going to take 2 years from the date to the relationship, unless you pay up front, right? But yeah, so outcomes are slippery. They sound simple, but they're a little slippery to grab.
So will this slippery make it hard to adopt at scale? So is it a fad that will pass, or this is a one-way train and it has left the station?
So I don't think it's a fad that will pass. Look, my primary view in outcome-based pricing is back to my 3 laws of pricing, which is, and VCs love to forget some of these laws. So let me just go and do my 3 laws, which are: 1, values the upper bound. And this is the part that excites the VCs. Hey, wait a minute, I can replace $1 million per year SDR team, and I could do it. I could charge $200K for that, $500K for that. I might even charge $800K for that, right? So the VCs get very excited about that and put a lot of pressure on outcomes. As an operator, right? We also understand if the other guy is willing to sell the same thing or something close to the same thing for 300,000, that's going to drive the price, right? So you have this balancing scale between the value you're delivering. And look, agentic software can deliver a lot more value than we used to. So the value pie got a lot bigger. And then the question is just how are we going to split it up? And we can't forget about alternatives. So I think we could charge a lot more because we're getting a lot more value. I think if our competitors are smart, they'll charge a lot more too. It only takes one person to ruin the price point in the market, so we have to be careful
Right.
on that. But that's why I think so I think outcome pricing is here to stay, but I don't think it's going to be quite as simple as we're delivering 500,000 in value, so we can all charge 400,000. That's not the way competition works.
Interesting. So let's take this ticket resolution thing, because you have in the market two competing examples in outcome-based pricing. So on the one hand, you have Sierra that it charges per outcome and only outcomes, but the outcomes are bespoke. They are tailor-made for the customer. And then you have on the other side of the spectrum, you have Intercom that charges, cheap and cheery 0.99 per resolution, but you're still paying for a seat and you're still paying for a platform, but it's still a fixed price that is a lot lower than Sierra's.
Yeah.
What's a winner model, or is it just by segment or by use case? Like where do you land on this spectrum? How does this play out?
So look, the thing battling either consumption-based pricing or outcome-based pricing is predictability, right? Customers like predictability. They have budgets they need to manage too. So one of the good things about outcome-based pricing is we're adding more value so we can charge for. If we don't structure it correctly, one of the bad things is it's not bad that it's more expensive because you're delivering more value, but it's bad if it's unpredictable, right? I think
Right.
people care much more about predictability than value. So a lot of times, look, even with consumption-based, we had these models that sounded like they were pure consumption-based, per transaction, per SMS sent. But then sales would take that and transform it into, hey, pre-buy this many. Right. So then we'd have predictability, or we'd have rollover credits like Snowflake had for a while. Right. So I think in between the people who make the pricing policy and the customer is the sales force. And I think they will often, particularly at enterprise, they're going to adapt the model perhaps in unanticipated ways to make it more palatable to the customer. And I think that's a good thing, frankly, because if you're not selling predictability, so I think absolute cost matters, Sierra versus Intercom, right? If Intercom's cheaper for a lot of people who want the basic service, that's probably good enough. But I actually think predictability is more important. I don't know which of those is more predictable, to be honest.
Interesting. So you think that people will be willing to pay more for predictability than it would you would think it would be rationally the
Yeah,
case?
I do. I mean, I can't remember your background before you founded Outreach, but if you worked your way up the corporate ladder and managed a budget, yeah, I care a lot about predictability, right? Because someone's going to
Right.
come thump me if I blow my budget out, right? CEO, you don't care quite as much. But yeah, predictability matters.
So how do you get around the outcomes, the fact that outcomes are variable and people like predictability? You sell buckets, you sell rollover credits.
Yeah, it's how you structure the deal, right? You could basically anticipate a certain number of outcomes. Like the default solution, I think, would be, hey, we think you're going to need, I'll go to SDRs, you're going to need 1,100 MQLs this year, and we charge you by the MQL generated, and therefore we're going to charge you this much price. And by the way, if you come in at 1,200, 1,300, we'll give you a buffer zone, and then beyond that, there'll be a price per MQL, right? You structure the deal to try and make it predictable unless things are radically different from the assumption. Or if you're really generous, you agree to reset it in year 2. Like year 1, we'll give it to you. Because one of the biggest problems with consumption-based pricing is I remember when we first got phones, like I don't know how many gigabytes of data I use in a month. I have no idea, right? Like get me some operating history and then I'll know. So I think if you want to reduce friction in rolling out outcome-based pricing, you're kind of pretty forgiving
Right.
in year 1. And then like, hey, now we have a baseline. Now the MQLs is a bad example of that because people know how many MQLs they need. but some stuff like how many tokens are going to process, I have no idea. It's just like asking me how many gigabytes I'm going to use. I have no idea.
So what you do is then you sign up a 2-year a 2-year contract or a 3-year contract, and then you figure out year 2 and 3 after year 1. Is that how you think about it?
I think that's one way to do it. Look, I'm just trying to overcome the predictability problem. And I think depending on what you're doing, the answer is either overage credits, right? Because basically the customer's I'm worried about coming under, right? Oh gosh, I didn't use everything I bought and I'm worried about going over. So I think the most flexible way to alleviate those worries is, hey, in year one, there'll be no penalty for going over. We'll reset the contract in year two, maybe based on this per outcome. I can even give you some idea how much we'll charge, kind of a volume discount.
Right.
And in year one, if you come under, I'll roll them over for you. Right. I'm just literally trying to eliminate the friction. This is not about, to me, this is about adoption because we're in the early days. It's not about where we're going to end up.
100%. Not only that, but if you do that, then you got yourself a 2-year deal. You see what I
Yeah.
mean? In a world where everybody's buying 1-year deals. So it's
Yeah,
pretty
you want
great.
predictability? I mean, that's a great argument. Hey, you want predictability? Well, what's in it for me? Okay. I'd like a longer deal. Yeah.
All right. So what happens then? How do you commission that deal? So tell me how's the rep getting paid?
Yeah. This is a hard one. And I must admit, I'm not an expert in it.
Oh, you run many a Salesforce. So like just riff a commission plan right
Yeah,
now
I can
for me,
riff
if
on
you
it.
will.
I can't do the best practice pattern matching. The riffing on it is, look, you got to pay for what you want. And what I think you want is certain number of credits sold. You want a certain number of dollars in first. So basically the comp plan. Look, there's two things I'm thinking right now. One is I'm trying to incent behavior change. So that makes me
Right.
want to make it, I'm willing to spend money to change behavior. So I want to make it simple for the reps to adopt and lucrative. So I'll tend to want to pay up front. Again, at maturity, whole different ball of wax. In an established category where we can forecast all this stuff very precisely, I might use a very different pricing model to get sales onto the model at the beginning. Hey, if you're going to sell 100,000, whatever outcomes, 1,000 outcomes on a year, I will pay you upfront for that year's outcomes. Year two is interesting, right? You have the same problem in SaaS in year two. Who Right, because if you get a longer contract, you tend to pay it up front, right? Because it was the deal that got booked, and if you get it renewed, it's actually a lot cheaper for the company, right? Because the cost of renewal is much lower than the cost of sale. So it's the same arbitrage there. But in general, look, I like sales personally. I like sales to land 2-3 year deals. I'm willing to pay them up front on year one, and then either a kicker on that for year 2 and 3, or to actually pay them in year 2 or 3, which is my preferred model. Salespeople don't like it, but I like the fact it incents them to stick around.
Anything around variable, aligning the variable comp to the variable commission. So like, can you be paying the rep for usage as the usage goes up or down, or like, is that too complicated?
I think you can do it, but I think it's hard administratively. But yeah, I mean, you could do it. Let me just think about it. Is it incenting what you want? Look, there is an argument you want to incent customer success, right? That the whole argument that we used on SaaS, right? When SaaS came to replace on-prem, it was like, oh, customer vendor alignment, right? Like we don't really make money until you renew, right? So for any CAC
Mhm.
payback period longer than 12 months, I'm not making money unless you renew, because I haven't recouped my acquisition cost. So you can argue with outcomes. If you're not getting outcomes, we're not getting money, right? And therefore, I shouldn't get paid. I think it's aggressive from a change management perspective. I think once we get closer to steady state, I like it better. Maybe there's a true up, right? Maybe I pay you, because the other thing with commissions, timing. Like, so maybe I pay you half your commission up front and I'll pay you the rest as the customer realizes value. It's probably what I would do. It would both align cash flows and also, hate to say it, prevent fraud, right? Because if I always like having something tied to cash, because I don't like paying people unless I get paid.
100%. But again, back you're selling
Yep.
outcomes.
Yeah.
So even if you sold a big bucket of outcomes where you roll over credits and
Yep.
and forgiveness if you go over in year one,
Yeah.
blah 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 blah. Like those are outcomes. If you don't deliver those outcomes, nobody's getting paid, including you. So
Yeah.
why would the rep get paid?
Well, I'd pay them in year one because I want them to sell outcomes. They may have no choice, right? I'm kind of presuming that there's two models running in parallel. I'm trying to migrate. If you just do a hard cutover, some of my concerns don't matter. Why would you pay the rep before you get paid? We do it in SaaS, whether we know it or not, right? When you
Yeah,
give
we
a
do.
kicker on year 2 and year 3, you're paying in advance where you might not get paid, right? The contract might call for payment, but relatively few SaaS vendors sue customers if they discontinue usage in a 3-year contract, right? So that money's definitely at risk. So I
So
think the vendors should be
no
willing to
clawback
take
on
some
you.
risk. Eh, you could do it, but you could. You could. I'm not a huge fan of clawbacks either, right? As you can probably tell, my bias is to keep the sales force happy because they feed the software company. And you could definitely do a clawback in that situation, but salespeople hate clawbacks. right?
Oh yeah,
So
nobody
yeah,
likes it. Nobody
yeah,
even likes the fact that it's in the policy. No, yeah, it's
yeah.
terrible.
Finance hates it. Everyone hates it. So
Everybody hates it.
I'm trying to optimize for what I think is the normal condition, which is we deliver the outcomes. And look, if you wanted a time commission based on them getting their first outcome, which is a good middle ground, right? Hey, they got the thing up and running. They got their first outcome. They had their first ticket. Maybe you pay half the commission then. If you wanted to be really aligned to outcomes, I would pay half on first outcome achieved. And then you could, I just don't like the accounting problem of having to stagger it, right? Like degenerating to I'm going to write you a check every day
But
based on
wait,
the
you
number of
have that
outcomes.
accounting problem to begin with. It's
Yeah.
the whole thing is RPO.
Yeah.
Like you don't recognize the revenue until the very end of the year, until you can prove that you deliver those outcomes. So accounting wise, you're screwed anyway.
Yeah, it's true. But I guess I got to track the outcomes to burn down the RPO. You are correct. I don't know. This is what I'm saying, Manny. I'm not the total expert on this, but here's the thing I do know.
All right,
And we
I
come
will
back
put
to
a
what-
vote on your next write up to write up about this.
Yeah,
'Cause
it's
I
an
got
important
CROs
topic.
coming up to me. He's like, "How do I structure these plans?" And I'm like, "Ask Dave. He knows."
Yeah. Okay. I got to do some research before I'm ready to answer that question. But look, it's a super interesting topic. It's one level of detail below that talk. But the instinct I will share is that sales forces have an interesting way of transforming our intent. I'll give you one other example. This is back to SaaS. But as soon as salespeople figured out NRR mattered a lot, they built it into deals. Right. So they literally build the deal.
I love my people coin operated. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, you get what you pay for, right? That's the point. And this happens when you start selling credits. They figure out a way to either build NRR into credits or to make sure the credits get used, or to make sure the customer gets what they want now that I have to buy credits. So
Right.
there's this last layer of transformation that we often forget about, which is deal structure. And the pricing model looks really pure over here, and then you go look at the deals you've cut, and you're like, oh, okay.
That's amazing. All right, so I'm gonna go down the other hole. I think that you wrote about this too. How does the whole edifice works when your margin goes from 80% gross margin to 40% gross margin?
Yeah.
Like now you have sales and marketing at 20%, you have R&D at 20%, you have G&A at 10%. Like there's just not enough to generate cash and to like box into the rule of 40. Like so how is this gonna play out? Like what are you seeing?
So first, I do believe AI products will never have lower gross margins than they have today. Right. Let's just be clear. Right. They should only go
I
up
don't
over
know.
time. We'll see. But I believe right now, my personal belief on this is that we're throwing AI is a lot of brute force. We're throwing brute force at the problem with LLMs, for example. And I think small language models, more efficient ways of computing, more specific models, domain-specific models, small models, I believe these are going to help contribute massively to efficiency. And that should help, right? Because in my opinion, and this is not uncommon in computing, we throw brute force at it because we can, and then we kind of validate that it works, and then we make it more efficient. Why make it more efficient if we don't know if it works, right? So that's what I think is going on, and I could argue it's a pattern that repeats itself. And therefore, I mean, I could use the example. This might be dangerous, but I'll try it. But Hadoop was kind of throwing brute force at the indexing problem, right? Or whatever Google called their Hadoop. I can't remember the name of it right now. MapReduce. So MapReduce was throwing brute force at the computing problem. Over time, we got better at it. Actually, Bitcoin's another great example. Proof of work.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about throwing brute force at a problem, and then they changed to, I think it was proof of stake. So it's not uncommon in computing to throw a lot of work, brute force at a problem, and then get more efficient over time. So I'm actually fairly optimistic that gross margins will go up over time. First observation.
So you don't believe in the whole Joven paradox that as efficiency gets better, you just consume more and you're back to the same old problem of gross margins.
Oh, I do
before you
believe in
move to
Jevons
point two.
paradox. Yeah. I think absolutely. When we make things cheaper, in many instances, people use more of them, right? I think the example of my talk was like, when light bulbs are cheap and don't burn out, you build the Sphere in Vegas, right? And you cover it with light bulbs on the outside and on the inside. And imagine if those bulbs burned out frequently or they cost a lot of money, right? The Sphere would be unmaintainable. So I do believe in general in Jevons paradox. But I think that's supporting my point, which is I think they will get cheaper over time and therefore we'll use more of them. And I think gross margins on AI, my personal belief is they're going to go up. The main point of gross profit was supposed to be a measure of your value add, right? Like just imagine we sell a chair and we bought wood and we added value and then we sold it, right? Like the gross profit on that chair should be the cost of the wood plus the cost of the labor to build the chair. And then that's kind of the value I created, right? The revenue I got for it minus the COGS equals the gross profit. And in my mind, if you're passing through a bunch of costs to an underlying AI model, it's like buying wood for the chair, right? It is literally a cost of goods sold. So you need, basically, the way I'd build the P&L is using the same percentages, but off gross profit, not off revenue.
But then you have competition, Dave. Then you have competition. What happens when competition shows up and they are using the one-up model that is a little bit better than yours, a little bit more expensive, that delivers 3 times as much as you do, and they have lower margins that are willing to eat it.
They have lower margins, but a better product is what you're saying, right? To make
Yep.
sure I understood it. Yeah.
Yep.
So that means, in theory, if they have a better product, they're going to have more revenue. So they're going to have lower margins. This is the problem with using margin, not dollars. They're going to have lower margins, but they're going to have more gross profit dollars. And which
Right.
company would you rather own shares of? I'd rather own shares of the company. Look, Wall Street and analysts are obsessed with margins, right? They always look at percents, but let's not forget dollars. My argument is,
I
in
love
New York,
that. I love that. I
right? You
love
might
that.
be 10 times as big as the other guy, and he's got he's got a few points of advantage on you on COGS, but who cares? You've
Right.
got a much bigger business, and I'd still try and build the PL. Look, the notion to me is that gross profit was supposed to be this notion of value add. Here's the value you added. So if you're a retailer, you've got very low gross profit because you're not adding that much value, right?
Right.
Then if you're a software company, you have very high gross margin, right? Because you were. And to me, the first order answer is just build the P&L off gross profit, not off revenue, because it's factoring out your true COGS, right? Which
Right.
will include model costs.
And at the end of the day, cash flow is cash, not percentage, right? Like it's just straight up cash, right? So if you have
Yeah, the
low
business.
margin at a high price, you're still good to go.
Yeah, right. The business is worth 10 times revenue, or in this case, it'll be worth 20 times EBITDA or 20 times free cash flow, and that's a dollar figure, right? It's not 20 times free cash flow margin. It's worth 20 times free cash flow.
Got it.
Or 50 times, whatever.
So what's your advice to all those, AI agent warriors out there building business models? Like, is it just go grab as many logos as you can right now because the game gets better later, or build a sustainable business from the very beginning to make sure that when the bubble passes, you're still alive?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question goes back to a very important concept, which is switching costs and switching costs. And I remember, look, when I took a marketing class one day at business school, and we were talking about, it was a long time ago, but we were talking about a product, and the person was talking about, if we cut the price, we'll sell more, and if we raise the price, what happens? And my immediate reaction, having spent my career in software, was just like, well, when you raise the price, people can't switch because they've already installed your system. And he's like, yeah, but I'm talking about a bottle of
100%.
wine. And if I raise the
Yeah.
price of a bottle of wine, there's no switching costs and grabbing the one next to it. And it made me, in that moment, realize what made our industry kind of unique is, as a friend once said, you don't buy enterprise software, you inject it into your corporate veins, right? And there is a switching cost here. So not always though, but so if you're in a market with high switching costs, grab share, right? Because you're going to get something for it downstream. The place where I think people make a mistake is if they're in a market with low switching costs and somebody can switch from one to the other like that, and then they go give it away. That doesn't make sense, right? Because you're giving it away, but you're not getting anything. And look, it's very hard to define what's enough switching costs. Like for Amazon, you can argue your wallet is a switching cost. Oh, I like to buy on Amazon because it's all set up. It's got my wallet. It's got my, right? And that makes me want to buy there more than somewhere else. Now, Shopify and others have done a good job undermining that. But it's a little, this notion of switching costs is a little trickier to get than you might think. I guess moat is now the fancy term for switching costs, or the modern
Yeah.
term. But
You have like Paycor, PayScale, Pay whatever,
yeah,
ADP. You have all these players that do almost the same thing, and on the
Yeah.
on the HRMS and the paying your salary,
Yeah.
So they all look the same. They're all systems of records, and they
Yeah.
switch from one to the Bamboo HR to like Paycor, PayScale, Paychecks.
Yeah.
They used to believe that those were high switching costs.
Yeah.
But here we are, jumping from one to the next. Why?
So I guess, look, it's very hard to talk about switching costs of the category unless you really know the category. And I don't know that category that well. I mean, and by the way, just because they're substitutes doesn't mean there's low switching costs, right? There could be, they could all be substitute products, but it could be very hard to switch from one to the other. Here's a
Right.
category I do know: financial planning. Right, I ran a company now called Planful in financial planning. Those are pretty hard systems to switch. Why? Because you're building models and budgets within the systems. So I think it's a 6-month project to switch off a planning system. And by the way, those planning systems for a mid-market company cost 25 to 50K a year. So 6 months is a lot relative to the cost of the system. It's a big project, right? Because I think we have to look at the switching costs relative to the cost of the software, right? For a $20 million system, if you can switch in 2 months, it's great. But for a 50K system, to take a 6 months to switch it, I think is pretty high. And I can tell you why the switching costs matter. Like Adaptive had a proprietary formal language. I don't know if they still do. Anaplan models would port to host models, right? You couldn't just click a button and move these things. So I think it's very hard for me to answer the question without knowing the space. I would just say switching costs are higher than you think. And I didn't actually know people were switching, I don't know what to call those, payroll systems or HR systems that
Yeah,
easily,
yeah.
because I thought they had pretty high switching costs, to be honest.
I thought so too, but there's just too
Yeah.
many of them, and they're all doing well. So like, I'm trying to figure out like why is that happening? Let's
Well,
talk about a different topic that was the
yeah,
reason we got into this podcast.
yeah.
Let's talk about the how you hire and what has changed in the last, say, 5 years or so with LLM or AI natives and those who were experienced in SaaS that may or may not apply to the future forward. How is the team composition in your mind between AI natives and all this experience from the last 10 years?
So, well, that's a really hard question. I'll tell you, well, I'll start with a different answer. I'll tell you the founders I like to back, which is those that recently graduated with degrees in AI. Those are my, right? Because I know they're cutting edge on AI.
So that's where you're putting your money.
Yeah, I mean, if you just want to know, like, if I took a traditional SaaS person would have a little bit of trouble unless they'd partner with somebody who's very strong at AI, right? Because I want to know the team understands the future technology and can leverage the current platform. And I do believe that developers grow up with stacks that they're familiar with. And look, a lot of them
Right.
can change stacks, but a lot of them don't. There's a certain inertia in learning a new stack, right? Like there are relational database people who weren't very interested in going to NoSQL, right? And then there are those who were, and they tended to be younger, less experienced, right? It wasn't the 45-year-old Oracle DPA who was hopping onto MongoDB, right? It was typically a developer who was frustrated with the limitations of relational databases. So, AI natives versus traditional SaaS people, my general answer on these things is you need a mix, and it depends on the function. I think selling and marketing doesn't vary that much, to be honest with you. Marketers have always tried to market value, good ones at least, right? So this notion, we talk about the outcome, whether we deliver it or not, right? Like I could be selling a laundry detergent that makes towels whiter, and I'm going to sell the fact that you get a kiss from your spouse when they come home, right? And the product is not a kiss machine, right? So I'm walking the benefit, right, in that slice of life
Oh,
commercial.
you sold that well. I want to get me some of that. Like that was well sold.
Yeah, right. So we've done this for a while. This notion of climbing the stack is not hard to us at all. In sales, I think it's similar. Sales is always trying to find the impact, right? What's the impact of this? They have a limitation and they're trying to trace the impact to say, so if I could fix this problem over here, your companies get this much benefit over there. So I think on the go-to-market side, this is actually more familiar territory than on the product side, where the tools you use to build systems have changed pretty radically. So I would tend to want to have more AI natives on the left, and I care a little bit less on the right.
What about marketing?
In marketing, probably more on the right. I think I care a little bit less. I'm just trying to think. Here's what I actually think. There's app marketers and platform marketers. And almost true for salespeople as well. And that's the one I find hard. It's not AI or not AI, but if you've been selling like a database platform your whole career and you try and sell an app, it's really hard because you now have a buyer, a persona, a domain expertise. Like, do you know how to talk to a CHRO? And if you've been selling databases to IT, you have no idea, right? And conversely, if you've been selling, HR systems to CHROs and go try and sell an AI platform like Writer, it's very hard because platforms do multiple things. It's like, well, what problem do we solve? Well, anything, right? That's it's a platform. So that to me has always been the big distinction in sales and marketing. If I only had one question to ask a new hire, it would be, did you sell platforms or apps? And I would map accordingly.
Interesting. So on the go-to-market side, you think experience matters more than being with the new generation of tools and how work is done?
Well, let me be clear. On the kind of strategic marketing side, yes. On the operational marketing side, no. Because now we're talking about people who use AI tools to run campaigns, build documents. So operationally in marketing, I'd want plenty of AI natives. And by the way, if you're a marketer, go play with all these tools. One of the things I like about Jason Lemkin, the SaaStr guy, is he's playing with Replit, or I can't remember which one, but he's building websites and he's using these tools all day and blogging about it. And I
He's
think it's great.
inspiring.
Yeah.
Like all the amount of replay work that he's doing and the agents that he's building, it's just like it puts me to shame.
Yeah, so just because you're old and experienced doesn't mean you can't learn this stuff, but you have to make the effort. And I'm making efforts in my own ways. I'm using it more for the kind of things I build. I don't build websites, um, but but yeah, I mean, my advice to me and anyone of my generation or the one after is make sure you learn this stuff because, for example, if you want to be in an operational marketing role like campaign management, campaign execution, digital marketing, you need to be cutting edge on a wide variety of tools and how people are using them. So I don't care if you're AI native or not, you need to understand the tool set and convince me you know how to use it.
100%. So you saw the report and the debunking as well of the 93% of AI
Yeah,
pilots failing,
yeah,
etc.
yeah,
So I know we all call BS on it, but there is a
yeah.
kernel of truth. I think you even mentioned that in
Yeah.
your comments. Like where do you think we're at, and where are gonna things going to be next year?
So that report, much as I'm a marketing person, I hate marketing, like, and I always say
That's a
the
strong
reason
word.
Google became the world's biggest advertising company was because they hated advertising, right? Never forget that the ads were on the side and they were clearly identified, and all that's been lost, right? The reason I belabor it now is now you can't find the content for the ads on Google, but when it started, right, it was the advertising company that became massive because they hated advertising. So I tend to react to clickbait very negatively. And as soon as I saw that report and read the first two paragraphs, like this thing's clickbait, because it's not even a great summary of the report, just to go 95% of all projects are failing. So I actually had to force myself to read it because I was like, clickbait, don't read, clickbait. And when I eventually read it, I believe the underlying message is there's a fairly standard change management problem. And I think what they found in that report was that AI coming in through the side door, the back door, was actually more positive than AI coming top down through big company projects. They're saying
Mm,
like AI is failing, but everyone's using it to summarize their sales calls, to build their notes, to generate the outline for the presentation. And it's like, okay, so that's not failing. It's a little bit more in the bring your own device era of AI, right? That's the way that was my takeaway from the report first, was that AI is actually working, but we're in the BYOD or now the BYOA era of bring your own personally licensed AI productivity tools to help your personal productivity. And I think that's a win. Like everyone goes, oh, productivity doesn't matter. It's like, no, productivity does matter. And then second, the big corporate projects I believe were failing largely due to what we would call change management. And there was nothing particularly new or novel about it in the way they were failing. So I just felt like they were sensationalizing the whole thing. So I really didn't like that report. But I agree with you. There is a grain of truth to it. Change management matters. If you screw up change management, projects fail. But I don't know. There was too much hubbub, too much clickbait.
okay. So is there any point of view around like how do you run this pilot so I should get into land? Like, is there any thought around like if as you start tying outcomes to this thing and measuring them, like we're gonna see an increase of this thing, or or you just gonna wait and see what happens next year?
I can't remember for why they were failing, but look, I remember how I felt about it. It was unremarkable, and it was the nature of enterprises trying new technology. So I think I didn't have any big takeaways on what to do differently from that report.
Got
Um,
it.
I think the answer would just be, I mean, look, the answer would be generic change management, which is be very careful to understand what the users want, what they value. Is it helping them with their needs, or is this just some top-down corporate initiative that when it finally gets to someone's desk, they don't want to use the system because it doesn't do what they want, but somebody at the top was in such a hurry to tell their boss that they're doing an AI initiative that they didn't actually care if people would adopt it. That was kind of the impression that I had.
Got it. You just published something on FDEs.
Yeah.
What do you find from your research?
So FDEs, so forward deployed engineers, is kind of a hot topic du jour. Back when I ran MarkLogic, which was an XML database company, we did half our business in federal government. So I competed against Palantir like 15 years ago when they were just starting because one of their first markets was military intelligence. So the first time I ever heard the term forward deployed engineer was probably like 2011, 2012. And
Oh,
at the
wow.
time, yeah, it was a long, long time ago. And I couldn't tell at the time if it was just old wine in a new bottle, right? Is this a fancy name for an SC? Right? Because Palantir always said they never had salespeople and never had marketing people, but somehow they got Wall Street Journal articles. So someone called the Wall Street Journal, like, you may not want to call them sales or marketing, but somebody sold that deal, right? Somebody. So there was a lot of kind of
Like
spin
Atlassian, right? Atlassian
yeah.
never had salespeople. They remember
Yeah,
that
but
too?
I think they actually didn't have them, right? Like I believed Atlassian. I never quite believed Palantir. And it's a little bit the same thing like consulting firms saying they don't have salespeople. Okay, so you don't have a dedicated sales role, but the partners sell, okay? And part of a partner. So you have salespeople. They're just not called salespeople, and they certainly don't look like enterprise software salespeople. I got that. And the question was, are forward deployed engineers, are they renamed SEs, i.e. sales consultants, pre-sales, or renamed post-sales consultants, i.e. consultants? And the answer to me, believe it or not, and I'm pretty skeptical, was neither, that they actually are, at least they started out, as forward deployed engineers. And we could define engineer by someone who can check code in or out of the code base. Like
Mhm.
we can have a very clear, and like, no, can SEs do that? No. Can post-sales consultants do it? No. Right? So I believe this made, and for Palantir, I think, to be honest, it's a bit of a mix now. I think some of it is a fancy name for a consultant. Some of it is, hey, if you want to recruit a kid out of Berkeley with a master's degree in computer science, he doesn't want to be an SE or a post-sales consultant, but he'll be a forward-deployed engineer, right? So I think it was kind of clever recruiting strategy. But
Yeah.
I think some of it's actually real. Like when people are doing it now, I think they're taking people who, and one of the other tests I have for realness is, do they rotate? Because if I'm permanently in the field, permanently billing, and you're measuring me by billable hours worked, I'm a consultant. You can call me whatever you
Right.
want, right?
Right.
But if I actually write code, checking code, and when I'm done with a gig, go back to corporate and resume my normal job as an engineer, i.e. you are literally forward deploying me for a while and then taking me back, then I think you meet that test. And I'll just give you one example of them from Palantir, because I remember one of the things we did was track terrorist organizations in that space. And they had not only built-in relationships like is a member of, is a former member of, but they had the taxonomy of Al-Qaeda, and it came with the system. And that to me is kind of application level knowledge built into the system. And I believe that was done by forward deployed engineers. So they would forward deploy, they would say, what do we need to do? Gosh, this customer, to solve this problem, we need a taxonomy of Al-Qaeda, right? Because we want to know who's a member of what and who knows whom. Link analysis, this is called. And to do that, we should not only make the system understand those relationship types, but also understand the taxonomy, right? So that's just an example. But long story short, I think they're real. I think they're on the rise. There's data saying that there's not a whole lot of, I think the data I quoted was like there's 375 open jobs across the
But
industry
wait,
for them now.
not real in the way that you
Yeah.
said it,
Yeah.
in that they're true engineers, like where they
Yeah.
go back and actually checking code. So
Yeah.
what percentage would you say are true engineers and which percentage are
Yeah. I
just
think at Palantir, it's unfortunately fairly low these days. I think at the new AI companies, it's actually higher. I think in some ways, and it makes more sense. Their products are less done. They're less baked. We should go forward, deploy an engineer to go finish the thing and make sure it works and tune the model and then come home. So I think with Palantir, it started out real, and over time it drifted to more kind of renamed post-sales, although I do believe they rotate some now still. But I think for the new AI companies, they're actually quite real.
interesting? So is it net positive or net negative?
I think it's a net positive. Look, Jeffrey Moore has this notion of completing the product, right? If you remember Crossing the Chasm, his basic thesis was two smart guys build something in a closet and they come out and it's really cool, but it doesn't actually solve anyone's problem, right? It's a huge engine, but there's no car, right? And the idea he had of Crossing the Chasm and the beachhead was that you need to complete the product kind of one market at a time, almost one industry use case intersection. So I've always viewed early stage startups as in the product completion business. So I think if you have a product completion problem, I think forward deployed engineers are awesome.
Yeah.
If you don't, then you probably don't need to do them, frankly. You could just use the standard PM as an intermediary to say, hey, I listened to the market, here's what we need to build. But when the product itself is incomplete, and or in the case of Palantir, the product is actually a series of solutions built around verticals, so they're always completing the product. right? Because there's lots of different products, quote unquote. Then I think it's valuable.
Got it. So to close, what would you be your advice to a new AI company, AI agent company coming online? Like what are the hires? What do you hire from? What are the gotchas? What are you gonna stop doing from the last 10 years and what you should be doing that is new and novel?
So first, one of the big differences between platforms and apps is platforms are built by very small numbers of incredibly bright people. Like the Oracle kernel database team was maybe 30 developers, right? To get into that team was super elite, right? Apps are built by larger numbers of people who are less skilled. They're still highly skilled, don't get me wrong, but they're not the same level of the people at the core of like the Oracle database, right? So I think AI platforms are much, much more like any other platform, which is you want a small team of incredibly elite people, which is why these people now make multiple millions per year, or even more than that, even a billion, like the acqui-hire of the scale guy, right? So because people have realized the 10x, 100x, 1000x value of those right people. And I think I heard some podcasts where they counted them. Like somebody tried to make an estimate. Like there's only like 395 people in the world who could build who could build this. So it's pretty amazing, right? So that's where we are. So that's why we have the talent war so hard at the core of the AI platforms. I think in general, software's always been a talent game. So even in apps, so you want to have small numbers of incredibly bright people in engineering would be my answer. So go hire pedigree, go hire brains, go hire experience at the right companies. On go to market, I think it's go hire people who know how to sell. And I think the biggest thing is they had to sell at new or non-incumbent companies. The biggest mistake we see people, I'm sure you can agree with this, is you hire somebody out of a big, like Salesforce today, a big, firmly established market leader, and you put them in a competitive deal. They're like deer in the headlights. I literally, at my last company, I'd hire people out of Hyperion, who was the leader in enterprise planning, put them, in a death fight against Adaptive Insights and Anaplan, and they wouldn't know what to do because it's like I work at the market leader. Like everyone returns my calls, and I always win. And, and
Right. I never compete.
I never competed. And I think you want to find people who are ready to go fight it out, basically. And if they're not ready, because these are going to be brutal cage fights, because these in winner take all markets right now is everything, right? If you have high switching costs, you should be grabbing all the market share you can because you're going to keep it. And people who are smart know that. And as I said in a recent article I wrote, you want your VP of sales to be someone who makes you uncomfortable, right? They're so aggressive. Like, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall, right? That's that's who you want to hire and go to market, especially if you're in kind of a greenfield market.
That's amazing. Dave, thank you so much for all the time that you gave us today and all the advice you have given me personally throughout this last few months, and for all the content. You are a beacon to the community.
Well, thank you. Thanks a lot, Manny. And it was great talking to you. Take care.
Good to see you. Now, if you like this podcast and you like this conversation with Dave, please subscribe to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your Get Pay fix. Let's get it.